Hey YouTube, if you've been watching my videos, you'll see I have shot an M1 Garand. Actually, some of the information I was looking up, it is pronounced M1 Garand. M1 is here. And you got the best lighting in here. Mine is made Springfield Armory. If you can see it or not, I'll try to get it. I ain't got the best focusing camera, but it will say Springfield Armory. Alright, where is that? Right here. The M1 does not use a magazine. It uses, if I can keep a hold of it, M1 uses a clip. These can be, for me, a little cantankerous to load. See if I can get it here to I can kind of show it. The easiest way I have found is to set the clip down and load the rounds into it. Making sure they're all pushed back as far as possible. It will hold 8. You can see they're not exactly level. And that's the trouble I have with getting that 8th one in. And I'll show you why here in a moment. I always have one that sticks up higher than the rest. When the M1 is loaded, see if I can do better this way. Of course, ammo goes in this way. I am hitting the front with the tip of the bullet. Sometimes I can remove one. Get them all to go down. And then I'm going to probably pop my fingers. You push down on the clip all the way, and it will lock in. This is hard to do. It's hard to do trying to sit down with your left hand when you're right-handed. Push down, and that will slide forward, and you got to get your finger out of the way. Of course that, okay, it did not chamber around. Okay, and I have it'll come forward and it'll chamber around. I've gotten the 7 in and then reinserted the 8th. So I really don't want to chamber around in the house. Let's see, there should be. You can hold this back. That back. I am going to put that on safety. I'll move this this way. Maybe I can show you. It'll eject the round. It'll go another round. That would be third round chambered. If I would have topped it off, that would have been fourth round chambered, fifth round chambered, sixth round chambered, seventh round chambered, eighth round chambered, and after you fire the eighth round, the clip will shoot out. When you're actually firing it, it shoots. It actually flies out. Let's get the camera back over here where you probably don't want to see me, but always wanted an M1, got a chance to get one almost 2 years ago now. Figured to do a video on it. Do a two-part here. Just a brief history. It's a well-shooting firearm. I don't shoot a whole lot because the ammo's not real cheap. I'm shooting Army surplus. Caliber 30 match. Military surplus cartridges. Lake City Armory Ammunition Plant. Over the top says dispose of fired cases, disposable. Okay, here it is. Trying to read upside down, people. Disposal of fired cases shall be as prescribed by Army regulations. So this is definitely Army surplus ammo. It is not recommended to use regular factory ammo in the M1. The military surplus is actually a lower velocity, lower power round. You can actually damage the action using a factory ammo. I need to do a little bit more research on that, but hold on a second. Hey, Susan? Susan?
Yes?
Bring me my reading glasses, would you, and my chew? A little bit of history on the M1 I printed off. It was actually a Canadian that designed the rifle. The one I have is an unassigned firearm. It was made for the war, during conflict, but never was issued. Winchester made some, International Harvester made some, Harrington Richardson made some, but well, the other half's getting in here with my reading glasses. Let's see if I can read enough to get started. Nope, here it is. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ah, much better. In 1888, an American named Hiram Maxim invented the machine gun, a wonder of the age, a gun that used the power of the bullet to extract and eject the empty brass casing, feed another bullet into the chamber, recock the hammer, and fire again as long as there was ammunition. All over the world, arms designers scrambled to adapt the auto-loading principle to rifles and pistols. Because of the low power of its small bullet, the pistol was relatively easy. The semi-automatic handgun began to appear 5 years later. So in 1904, or 1903 would have been the first semi-automatic handgun. The rifle, however, was much more difficult because the power of the cartridge was so strong it usually broke the rifle. out for only a few shots. You'll see that if you use factory ammunition in the M1. World War I taught the Army the value of heavy firepower, and as soon as the war ended in 1918, U.S. Ordnance began to search aggressively for an auto-loading infantry rifle. Over the next 10 years, many inventors submitted designs for testing, but none proved acceptable. If they could stand up to the punishment, they were too heavy. And if they were light enough to be portable, they had to be in a small caliber. Not effective on the battlefield. One of the more promising designs was submitted by a young Canadian-born inventor named John Cantius Garand, or, as the information I found earlier, Arndt. He was quickly employed by the U.S. Arms Factory, Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, to develop and design further. Although promising, the rifle eventually reached a dead end, and the self-taught Arndt sent about on a new design. His new rifle derived the power to operate by tapping off the propellant gases to the fired bullet and using it to cycle the rifle. This design eventually beat out all the competition and was adopted as the standard U.S. infantry rifle in 1936. So the M1 was actually adopted before we even thought of entering World War I. Pearl Harbor was bombed December 7th, 1941. So 5 years before Pearl Harbor. Mass production of the M1 Garand began at Springfield Armory in 1937, and the first rifles were delivered to the Army in 1938. Production rates gradually increased, and early bugs were worked out in those pre-war years. In 1940, a second source was enlisted when the Winchester Repeating Arms Company was contracted to manufacture the M1 Garand. The expanding war in Europe and the increasing tension with Japan increased the sense of urgency to equip our forces with this modern rifle. When Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the M1 rifle became top priority. Both Springfield and Winchester operated around the clock, producing more than 4 million M1 rifles by the end of the war in 1945. The United States was the only country to equip its troops with an auto-loading rifle as the standard infantry weapon in World War II. It gave our troops a tremendous advantage in firepower and led General George Patton to call the M1 Garand the greatest battle implement ever devised, and that is in quotes, so I'm assuming that is verbatim. After the war, many M1 Garand rifles were mothballed and put into storage. Others were loaned to allies as the Cold War with the Soviet Union heated up. When North Korea attacked South Korea in 1950, M1 rifle production was resumed. Although the primary source remained Springfield Armory, 2 new manufacturers were contracted: International Harvester Corporation and Harrington Richardson Arms. Almost 1,500,000 new M1s were produced in the 1952 to 1957 period. So we're up to over 5,500,000 M1s had been produced by this time. It was the main United Nations infantry weapon for the Korean War. In the early 1950s, U.S. Ordnance began developing a new infantry rifle, one that would have a larger capacity magazine and selective fire capability. That is, it could be fired fully automatic like a machine gun, in addition to semi-automatic like the Garand. After much trial and error, an updated M1 was adopted in 1957 as the M14 rifle. Although the M1 Garand was officially obsolete from that time forward, it remained in service around the world through the Vietnam era. It was and is truly an amazing rifle, and its inventor, John C. Garand, ranks among the very best of patriots. A 2008 article in NRA's American Rifleman magazine rated the M1 Garand the #1 infantry rifle of all time. I'd like to print up a comparison of the M16 I'll be called, it's just the M16 or M16A1, the first M16 that was used during Vietnam. And I know it wasn't very well liked, but this one seems to be getting rave reviews all the time. It does have a windage and elevation. Safety. Here. Safety is front side of the trigger guard. Push it into the trigger guard for safety. When you get your finger in the trigger guard, simply push it forward and it's off safety. One thing I like about this, you put it on safety, I can put a small shank lock. See if I can show it here. This ain't very easy with this type. There it is. You can see the circle. That will go. That's on safety. It's on the inside. But if I push it forward, it's off safety. I put it on safety, and I can put a lock through there and lock it on safety. Cable lock, it doesn't matter. I could use just a regular lock with a small shank on it. My next video, we'll get this thing out. We'll fire some rounds to it, pump some steel. See if I can adjust these sights in and get a. I did the testing my gongs. I didn't hit very well, so I'll see if I can sight it in. It does have peep sights on the rear. Typical military sights on front. But part 2, I'll get this out and we'll put some rounds to it.